2:17 in the morning. The number glowed from the bottom corner of the monitor, a small, malevolent eye in the darkness of my studio apartment. My own eyes burned from staring at the screen, at the CAD drawing that refused to cooperate. A support beam calculation was off, just by a fraction, but enough to make the whole structure unsafe in the simulation, enough to keep me awake. The only sounds were the low hum of the computer's fan and the faint, rhythmic click of my mouse. Click, drag, delete, click, drag. The entire space smelled of stale coffee and the warm plastic of the overworked electronics. The apartment was a single, large room I had partitioned with bookshelves and a folding screen. It was a mess of rolled-up blueprints, scattered reference books, and empty mugs. Against the far wall, dominating the space, stood the mirror. I bought it last week from a dusty second-hand shop downtown. It was huge, floor to ceiling, framed in dark, heavy wood carved with unsettlingly intricate leaves and vines. The glass itself was old, with a few faint, smoky imperfections. I told myself it would make the cramped room feel larger, a simple architect's trick to create an illusion of depth. A design choice. Now, it just felt like a second, silent occupant. I leaned back in my chair, stretching until my spine popped. My gaze drifted from the screen and slid across the polished surface of the mirror. For a fraction of a second, something was wrong. In the reflection, my head wasn't tilted back towards the ceiling. It was angled slightly to the right, my reflected eyes not looking at the screen or the ceiling, but aimed directly at the apartment door. I snapped my head forward, my heart giving a single hard thump against my ribs. I stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, perfectly mimicking my own wide-eyed, startled posture. The room was the same. The angle was the same. Just a trick of the light, of exhaustion. "Fucking hell, Jacob," I muttered, the words a rough whisper in the quiet room. "Get a grip." I rubbed my temples, the skin tight with a burgeoning headache. It was just eye strain. Had to be. I turned back to the glowing screen, the flawed blueprint waiting for its fix. Click, drag. Another 20 minutes passed. The numbers on the screen swam together, a meaningless dance of lines and angles. My pencil, a simple graphite mechanical one, slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. I swore under my breath and bent down from my chair to retrieve it. My hand groped around the chair leg in the dim underdesk shadows. As I did, my gaze traveled upward, along the floor, to the base of the great mirror, and I froze. My hand stopped its search. My breath caught in my throat. In the mirror, the chair was empty. No, not empty. The reflection of my body was still sitting in it, perfectly upright. It wasn't slumped over or bent down. It was sitting straight-backed, hands resting on its thighs, head turned, looking down at me, at my real self, crouched on the floor. Its expression was placid, unmoving, just watching. A wave of cold washed through me, so intense it felt like ice water injected into my veins. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was pinned by that impossible gaze. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself up so fast, the chair screeched back on the floor. Everything was normal. My reflection shot up with me, a mirror image of my own panicked motion, my own sweat-sheened face, my own heaving chest. The figure that had been sitting was gone, replaced by my own frantic self. I stood there, panting, one hand braced on the desk. My fingers found the lost pencil on the floor, my movements clumsy. "Sleep deprivation," I told myself, the words feeling thin and useless. "You're just seeing things. You need sleep." But the chill wouldn't leave. It had sunk into my bones. That image was burned into my mind. My own motionless form, sitting in my chair, watching me. I couldn't go back to the blueprint. The numbers were a blur. The screen's glow felt accusatory. My eyes kept flicking back to the mirror, searching for any inconsistency. I tried to force a casual posture, leaning against the desk. I tried a smile, an attempt to prove to myself that everything was fine. In the glass, the smile didn't reach my eyes. The corners of the reflected mouth tightened, but it wasn't a smile. It was a sneer. A cold, knowing smirk that seemed to see right through me, to mock the terror I was trying so hard to conceal. A current of pure dread traced its way up my spine. That was it. I couldn't stand it anymore. The feeling of being watched, of being judged by my own face, was unbearable. On the back of the sofa was an old canvas drop cloth I used for painting projects, stiff with dried specks of white and gray. I would cover it. I would just throw the cloth over the goddamn thing and deal with it in the morning. I took a step towards the sofa. My hand reached out for the rough fabric. The instant my fingertips brushed against the canvas, a sharp click sounded from the breaker box by the door. Every light in the apartment died. The desk lamp, the overhead fixture, the small light over the kitchenette. All gone. The humming of the computer tower cut out. The sudden absence of its noise, a shock in itself. The only thing left was the monitor, its emergency battery kicking in, casting a sickly blue-green light across the desk and the floor in front of it. The room plunged into a profound, suffocating darkness, trapping me in that small pool of phantom light. I was alone. With it. I stood motionless between the sofa and the desk, my hand still hovering in the air where the cloth had been. I didn't dare breathe. My ears strained, trying to catch any sound, but there was nothing. The city outside was asleep. The building was silent. It was just me and the darkness, and that rectangle of blue light painting the floor. My eyes, slowly adjusting, found the mirror. It was a black void, a slab of pure night, except where the monitor's glow touched its surface, creating a hazy, shifting patch of light. And in that patch of light, something moved. Slowly, deliberately, my reflection raised its right hand. It wasn't my reflection. It couldn't be. My own hands were clenched into tight fists at my sides, my knuckles white. But I saw it. The silhouette of a hand. My hand, rising in the glass. At the exact same moment, a pressure began to build on my own right hand. It was an external force, cold and definite. Like an invisible glove closing around my fist, trying to pry my fingers open and lift my arm. I fought it. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. I threw all my strength, all my will into keeping my arm down. My muscles bunched, straining against the unseen power. It was a silent, desperate war fought in the dark. The pressure increased, an icy strength that felt inhuman. It wasn't just pushing. It was commanding, forcing its way into my nerves, my tendons. I could feel the individual muscles in my forearm, twitching and firing against my will, my arm slowly, agonizingly, beginning to rise from my side. I gritted my teeth, a low groan tearing from my throat as I focused everything I had on this single horrifying battle against my own body. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure vanished. With a loud whomp and a fizz, the overhead lights flickered back to life, flooding the room with harsh yellow light. The computer tower whirred back on. The normalcy of it was a physical blow. I stumbled back, my legs weak, and fell into my desk chair. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I was drenched in sweat, my shirt clinging to my skin. I looked wildly around the room. Everything was as it should be. The books, the mugs, the drop cloth on the sofa. I looked at the mirror. My own face stared back, pale, terrified, but mine, just my own reflection. I gulped down air, trying to slow the frantic hammering in my chest. It was a nightmare, a waking nightmare, brought on by stress and no sleep. It had to be. I laughed, a short, sharp, hysterical sound, and then I looked down at my right hand. The hand that had just fought a war. It lay on my thigh, palm up. And on the back of it, spreading across the skin over my knuckles, a discoloration was appearing. It started as a faint pinkish shadow, then deepened, blooming into a dark, ugly purple. It was the distinct, undeniable shape of a grip. The outlines of 4 fingers and a thumb, pressed so hard into my flesh that the blood vessels beneath had burst. A bruise. A fresh, livid bruise, as if someone, or something, had just released me from a grip of impossible strength. I woke up on the sofa. My neck was a knot of stone, and my back ached from the weird angle. I was still in yesterday's clothes, the fabric stiff and smelling of sweat. Gray morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting the apartment into pale stripes. The bruise on my hand throbbed with a low, steady pulse. I didn't have to look at it to know it was there. I could feel its heat. For a long moment I didn't move. I just lay there and listened. The building was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. The distant groan of pipes. Normal sounds. It was a hallucination. It had to be. A waking nightmare born from staring at a monitor for 18 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and exhaustion. The power had shorted out, a common occurrence in this old building. In the split second of darkness and confusion, My tired brain had filled in the blanks with monsters. The pressure on my hand, a muscle cramp, a psychosomatic response to the stress. The bruise? I must have slammed my hand against the desk when the power came back on and startled me. Yes, that made sense. It was a chain of unfortunate, explainable coincidences. I sat up, my joints protesting. The drop cloth was still slung over the back of the sofa. A limp, wrinkled shape. The mirror, across the room, was uncovered. In the weak light, it was just a piece of furniture, its dark frame inert, its surface reflecting a dim gray version of the messy room. Nothing sinister about it. It was just glass and wood. I forced myself to breathe, a long, slow inhale. Exhale. See? Just a mirror. I was an architect. I dealt in facts, in physics, in things that could be measured and proven. There were no monsters. I needed coffee. I needed the noise of the television. I needed to wash the night off me. Pushing myself to my feet, I stumbled toward the small kitchen area, grabbing the remote from the coffee table as I went. I jabbed the power button. The screen flickered to life with the bright, cheerful graphics of a local morning news program. A woman with impossibly white teeth was smiling, talking to a man in a crisp suit. Their manufactured cheerfulness was an insult. I turned away, fumbling with the coffee maker, my hands clumsy. The sound of their voices filled the space, a meaningless drone. And in other news, we mark a somber anniversary today. 1 year ago, a fatal hit-and-run on Route 9 claimed the life of college student Amelia Vance. The case remains unsolved. My hand froze over the bag of coffee grounds. The plastic crinkled in my grip. Police are once again appealing to the public for any information. The male anchor's voice continued, his tone shifting to one of practiced solemnity. No new leads have emerged in the past 12 months. The family is still searching for closure. On the screen, a graphic flashed up. A school portrait of a young woman with dark hair and a bright, hopeful smile. Below it, a grainy, enhanced photo taken from a traffic camera. It was a dark sedan, seen from the rear. The license plate was an indecipherable smear of light. The bag of coffee slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thump, spilling dark grounds across the worn linoleum. My blood went cold. It felt like all the warmth was draining out of me, leaving an empty, frozen shell. I stared at the blurry image of the car on the screen. It was just a car. It could have been any car. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I couldn't breathe. My gaze flicked from the television to the mirror across the room. It just reflected the back of my head, my rigid posture. Clicking off the TV, I plunged the room back into silence. The spilled coffee on the floor looked like dried blood. I had to face it. I had to prove to myself that it was nothing. Turning from the kitchen, I took a deliberate step toward the bedroom space, then another. My bare feet were silent on the hardwood floor. The air grew stiller as I approached the great mirror, as if I were wading into deeper water. I stopped a few feet away. The light from the main window was behind me, putting my reflection in partial silhouette. I raised my right hand, the bruised one. I held it up to the light, turning it over. It was worse than I thought. The marks weren't just purple anymore. They had deepened to a sick blackish blue, the outlines of the four fingers and thumb starkly defined against my pale skin. It was the kind of deep tissue damage that came from immense pressure, from a violent, crushing grip. I didn't do this to myself by hitting the desk, I knew that. It was a useless lie. My eyes lifted from my hand to my reflection. It looked normal, pale, haggard. But it was me. It mimicked my every move as I leaned closer, my breath fogging a small patch on the cold glass. I studied its face, its eyes, searching for that flicker of otherness, that sneer from last night. There was nothing. Just my own tired face, staring back. Relief, thin and fragile, started to dawn. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just losing my mind. That's when I saw it. It was almost invisible. A flaw in the glass near the upper right edge of the frame. A hairline crack, no thicker than a piece of thread, spiderwebbing out for a mere inch. It wasn't a smoky imperfection of old glass. This was new. A fresh fracture. I was certain, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it hadn't been there yesterday. I leaned closer still, my nose almost touching the glass, trying to see if the crack was on the surface, and the man in the mirror smiled. It wasn't a big movement. It was a subtle, horrifying twitch. The corners of his mouth pulled back just enough to show the edges of his teeth. His eyes, my eyes, were cold and flat. He was looking right at me. A wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. I started to pull back, a choked sound in my throat, but I was frozen in place. Slowly, deliberately, the reflection raised its left index finger. It moved with a fluid grace that I did not possess. My own hands were trembling at my sides. It brought the tip of its finger up to the hairline crack, and it tapped the glass. From the inside, a sound reached my ears. A dry, distinct tick. It was quiet, but it was not in my head. It was a real sound in the room, sharp and clear. A physical impact. Then it came again. Tick! The reflection's finger tapped the glass in perfect sync with the sound I was hearing. It looked at me, its smile widening slightly, and tapped again. Tick! My phone, lying face down on the desk across the room, lit up. The sudden flash of its screen made me flinch. A notification box glowed in the dimness. I could read the words from where I stood. It was a calendar reminder. I hadn't set any reminders. 2 words, in stark, block capitals. 1 year. The connection was instant, a jolt of pure electricity through my nervous system. The TV report, the mirror, the phone. They were all connected. This wasn't random. It wasn't a nightmare. It was happening. Panic, absolute and overwhelming, shattered my paralysis. I had to get out. Now, I spun away from the mirror, my feet scrambling for purchase on the smooth floor. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what that thing in the glass was doing now. I lunged for the front door, my only thought to get out into the hallway, into the city, anywhere but here. My hand closed around the cold brass of the deadbolt. I twisted. It didn't move. I threw my weight against it, grunting, my fingers slipping on the smooth metal. The lock was jammed solid. It wouldn't turn a single millimeter. I tried the doorknob, rattling it uselessly. It was locked from the outside, or it was broken. It didn't matter. I was trapped. From the bedroom behind me, the sound came again. Tick, 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 tick. It was faster now. Impatient. A rapid, mocking rhythm beaten out on the other side of the glass. It was taunting me. No, I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide, fixed on the dark space of the bedroom entryway. I could feel its gaze on me. I felt hunted. Tick, 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 tick. The sound was an insect burrowing into my brain. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around the apartment. The windows were too high. There was nowhere to go. The bathroom. I bolted. I ran the 10 feet to the small bathroom off the main room, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I slammed the door shut behind me, the sound of it echoing in the small, tiled space. My shaking hand fumbled with the cheap push-button lock on the knob. It clicked into place. I was safe. For a second. I pressed my back against the door, sliding down to the cold tile floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I sat there, curled into a ball, listening. The tapping from the bedroom continued, a maddeningly steady counterpoint to the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. Tick, 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 tick. It was like it was enjoying this. It knew I was in here. It knew I was afraid. I shut my eyes, pressing the heels of my palms into them, as if I could physically block out the sound. Please stop. Please just stop. And then, it did. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was heavy, expectant. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. A footstep. A creak of the floorboards. Nothing. Just the low hum of the building's ventilation system, a sound I hadn't noticed before. Minutes passed. 1, 2, 5. The silence stretched on, thin and brittle. Slowly, carefully, I got to my feet. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door. Nothing. Absolute quiet. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had gone. My hand, slick with sweat, closed around the doorknob. I took a deep breath and turned it. The lock disengaged with a loud click. I opened the door a crack an inch, then 2, peering into the apartment. Everything was still. The gray light hadn't changed. The spilled coffee was still on the kitchen floor. The bedroom space was just a dark rectangle. Nothing moved. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I felt weak, my adrenaline-fueled strength vanishing, leaving me trembling and hollowed out. I stumbled back into the bathroom, leaning over the sink, splashing cold water on my face. The shock of it helped. I looked up, into the bathroom mirror. My own breath had fogged the glass, turning my reflection into a blurry, indistinct ghost. As I watched, the condensation began to clear. Droplets of water ran down the glass in little rivers, and as they did, I saw that something had been drawn in the steam, lines traced by a fingertip. They formed 3 short words, written in crude, shaky capitals. You know. I left the bathroom. My hand came away from the doorknob, slick with sweat. The words on the other mirror felt branded on the inside of my eyelids. You know. The apartment was a dead space, a box of gray light and silence. The bedroom was a black hole at the far end of the room. I did not look at it. I looked at the floor, at the wall, at the spilled coffee grounds near the kitchen counter. They looked like a dark stain spreading on the linoleum. My phone was on the desk. Its screen was dark now. I picked it up. My hand trembled, the bruise across the back of it a deep, ugly purple. I searched for locksmiths. My thumb tapped the glass screen, the sound loud in the quiet. I called the first number. A machine answered. I hung up. The second number rang twice, then went to a recorded message about business hours. I tried a third, a 24-hour service. A woman answered, her voice tired. Can't get anyone out there till tomorrow afternoon, Han. We're swamped. This is an emergency, I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. My own voice sounded thin. Everyone's is an emergency. A click. She was gone. I tried 4 more numbers. No, maybe tomorrow. The soonest is evening. Nothing. It was a city of millions, and I could not find a single person to open a door. I threw the phone onto the sofa. It bounced on the cushions. I was sealed in. My stomach made a low, wet sound. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. The hunger was a dull ache, a separate pain from the knot of fear in my gut. There was a box of cereal in the kitchen, a carton of milk in the humming refrigerator. To get to it, I had to walk past the opening to the bedroom. I had to turn my back on it. I did not move for a long time. I just stood there, listening to the building. The groan of the pipes. The faint rumble of traffic from the street below. Normal sounds. Nothing was normal. I took a step toward the kitchen. Then another. My bare feet made no sound on the wood floor. I kept my eyes locked on the kitchen counter, on the silver faucet, on the box of Cheerios. I did not look to my left. I did not look toward the dark rectangle of the bedroom door. I reached the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I poured cereal into a bowl. It rattled like bones. I got the milk. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I leaned against the counter and ate, shoveling the cereal into my mouth with a spoon. I did not taste it. I just chewed and swallowed. My eyes scanned the main room. The sofa. The coffee table. The desk. The large, white drop cloth I had thrown over the arm of the sofa was gone. It was on the floor. It lay in a heap by the entrance to the bedroom, a crumpled white shape. I froze. The spoon halfway to my mouth. Milk dripped onto the floor. I had not moved it. I knew I had not. I had been in the bathroom. The door had been shut. The cheap button lock engaged. I had heard no one. There was no sound. But it was moved. The mirror was uncovered. I could see the edge of its dark frame from here. A hard black line against the gray wall. It was waiting. The bowl slipped from my hand. It did not shatter. It hit the linoleum with a dull, heavy thud, spilling milk and cereal in a pale, lumpy pool beside the dark coffee grounds. I didn't care. The mess on the floor did not matter. I turned slowly. I faced the bedroom. I had to look. I had to see. I walked toward it. Each step was an effort of will. The air grew colder as I approached, a noticeable drop in temperature that had nothing to do with a draft. I stopped 5 feet from the frame. I looked into the glass. The man inside looked back at me. It was my face. Pale. Strained. Dark circles under the eyes. The bruise on my hand was reflected perfectly. But something was off. I squinted, leaning forward an inch. The jawline. My jawline has a certain sharpness, a defined angle. The reflection's jaw was softer. The line from ear to chin was a smoother curve. The cheekbones, too. Mine are prominent. His were less so. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible difference, the kind you would only notice if you stared at a face every day of your life. My face. I rubbed my eyes hard with the heels of my hands, pushing until I saw sparks behind my eyelids. Exhaustion. Stress. It had to be. My brain was playing tricks on me again, projecting what it wanted to see, what it feared. I lowered my hands and looked again. The softness was still there. It was more pronounced now. It was not my imagination. The shape of the face in the mirror was changing. The skin seemed to be smoothing out, the faint lines of stress around the mouth and eyes receding. I watched, my breath caught in my chest, as the reflection's chin became more delicate, the neck appearing longer, slenderer. The lips grew fuller, the brows arched. I was watching my own face melt away. In its place, another was emerging. The gash on my chin from a childhood fall vanished. The small scar above my left eyebrow faded into nothing. The harsh angles of my face dissolved into a softer, more feminine shape. The eyes, they were my eyes, but they were bigger now, wider, the dark irises seeming to swim with a light I did not possess. The face staring back at me was no longer my own. It was the face from the news report, the school portrait. It was Amelia Vance. She was looking at me from inside my own reflection. Her dark hair framed a face that should have been a memory, a grainy image on a screen. But it was here, real. Her expression was not angry. There was no menace in her eyes, no hatred. There was only a profound and bottomless sadness. A sorrow so deep it felt like it was radiating out of the glass, a cold wave that washed over me and settled in my bones. She looked at me as if she knew me, as if she pitied me. I took a step back. A sound, a small whimper, escaped my lips. I couldn't tear my eyes away. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. Her face in the mirror began to contort. The sadness in her eyes twisted into an expression of appalling agony. Her mouth stretched open, wider and wider, the lips pulling back from the teeth in an impossible rictus of torment. It was a silent scream, a perfect mime of pure terror trapped behind the glass. Then, the sound hit me. It was not silent in the apartment. A scream tore through the air, high-pitched and piercing, a blade of sound that stabbed directly into my ears. It was a woman's scream, filled with pain and fear, and it was coming from everywhere at once. It vibrated in the floorboards, it rattled the window panes. It was real. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside my head, inside my chest. I yelled, a raw, choked noise lost in the overwhelming shriek. I staggered backward, tripping, my legs tangling with the small side table next to the sofa. I fell hard. There was a crash of wood and metal, and the sharp, explosive pop of the lamp's light bulb as it shattered against the floor. And then, silence. The scream cut off as if a switch had been flicked. The sudden quiet was deafening. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the faint, high-pitched ringing in my ears. I lay on the floor amidst the wreckage of the table, my heart hammering against my ribs like a fist. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The room was darker now without the lamp. Broken glass glinted on the floor. I looked at the mirror. It was me again. My own face, wild-eyed and terrified, stared back from the gloom. The woman was gone. The reflection was just a reflection, mimicking my own panicked movements. It was over. Whatever that was, it was over. Relief, cold and shaky, started to creep through me. But something was wrong. In the dim light, I could see a dark line at the corner of my reflection's mouth. It was thin, almost black. As I watched, a single crimson droplet formed at the end of the line, hung there for a second, and then fell, smearing a red streak down its chin. The man in the mirror was bleeding. My own mouth felt strange. A coppery taste filled it, thick on my tongue. Without thinking, I raised my right hand, the one without the bruise, and brought my fingertips to my lips. I touched the corner of my mouth. I pulled my hand away and looked at it. My fingers were wet. They were stained with fresh, bright red blood. I scrambled backward, crab walking on my hands and heels, the floor rough against my palms. Splinters of glass from the broken lamp pricked my skin. The coppery warmth of blood filled my mouth, a thick, sickening fluid coating my tongue. I spat. A dark red blotch appeared on the pale wood of the floor. Across the room, the figure in the mirror remained unchanged. It was me, my own face, but its mouth was clean. It just stared. A blank observer. The terror was a physical thing. A cold liquid that had replaced my blood. It was in my apartment. No, it was in the mirror. No, it was in my body. The blood was the proof. It had reached across the empty space between the glass and my flesh and made me bleed. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't stress. This was real. A wave of fury, hot and clean, cut through the cold. It was the anger of a cornered animal. I wouldn't be a spectator to my own violation. I wouldn't just lie here and wait for it to peel my skin off from the inside out. I surged to my feet, my legs unsteady. My eyes scanned the room for a weapon. The phone on the sofa was useless. The fallen lamp was a tangle of wire and broken metal. The kitchen knives were a room away. My gaze landed on the heavy oak dining chair I used at my desk. It was solid, old, weighed a ton, perfect. Rage gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I lunged for the chair, my hands grabbing the high back. I hefted it, the muscles in my back and shoulders screaming in protest. It felt like lifting a block of cement. I turned, planting my feet. The man in the mirror watched me, his expression unreadable. He did not move. He did not brace himself. He just waited. "Fuck you," I snarled, the words wet with bloody spittle. I roared, a sound torn from my lungs, and swung the chair. I put everything into it, every ounce of fear, every shred of sanity I had left. The heavy oak legs cut a whistling arc through the dim air, aimed directly at the center of the glass. I expected an explosion of shattering silver. I expected the frame to splinter and the thing inside to vanish into a million pieces. Thud. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp crack of breaking glass. It was a low, dense, percussive impact, like hitting a punching bag filled with wet sand. The chair bounced back with ferocious force, wrenched from my grip. It flew backward, tumbling end over end and crashed against the wall behind me. I stared, my arms vibrating from the shock. The mirror was untouched. Not a crack, not a scratch, nothing. It stood there, its surface as smooth and dark as still water. My hands stung. I looked down. The violent recoil had shattered the wood of the chair's backrest in my grip. Long, sharp splinters of oak had driven themselves deep into my palms. Blood, my blood, welled up around them, dark and glistening. I looked up from my bleeding hands to the mirror. The man inside looked at his own hands, clean and unmarked. Then he slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. And he smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, tight, contemptuous smirk, a little twitch at the corner of the mouth that said, "Is that all you've got?" The sight broke something inside me. The anger vanished, replaced by a dread so absolute it was paralyzing. I could not fight it. I could not break it. I was a fly, trapped under a glass. And then the torture began. The reflection's smile faded. It raised its hands, slowly, deliberately. The movement was a perfect imitation of a mime, each motion clean and defined. It brought its hands to its own throat. Its fingers wrapped around the column of its neck. It squeezed. My throat slammed shut. My airway vanished. 1 second I was breathing raggedly, the next there was nothing. A solid wall had come down inside my esophagus. I couldn't inhale. I couldn't exhale. A desperate, silent gasp fought to escape, but my vocal cords were clamped in a vice. My hands flew to my own neck, clawing, trying to pull away the invisible fingers that were choking me. My nails scraped my skin, but it was useless. The pressure was internal. It was everywhere. I stared into the mirror, my eyes bulging. The man inside watched me suffer, his own expression placid, his fingers tightening, his knuckles white. My lungs began to burn, a desperate, fiery ache for air. Black spots danced in my vision. The room started to swim, the edges blurring. I was going to pass out. I was going to die on my own floor, strangled by my own reflection. Just as the world was about to fade to black, he let go. Air rushed back into my lungs with a sound like a torn sail. I collapsed onto my knees, coughing and retching, my body convulsing. I sucked in great heaving gulps of air that felt like swallowing gravel. Drool and tears streamed down my face. My throat felt raw, bruised. I looked up, my vision still blurry. The reflection stood perfectly still. It gave me a few seconds to recover. It let me catch my breath. Then, its right arm drew back, its hand curling into a tight fist. "No," I rasped, the sound barely a whisper. "Please." I tried to scramble away, to turn, to look at anything else, but my eyes were glued to the glass. I watched, helpless, as the fist of my reflection shot forward. It didn't aim for the glass, it aimed for its own face. I saw the knuckles connect with the cheekbone. A flash of white-hot pain exploded on the left side of my face. My head snapped to the side from the force of a blow that hadn't happened. A deep, throbbing agony radiated from my cheek, so intense it made my teeth ache. I cried out, a thin, sharp yelp of pain, and fell onto my side, clutching my face. It felt like I'd been hit with a brick. The skin was on fire. I could feel it swelling already. I lay on the floorboards, whimpering, a pathetic, beaten thing. The thing in the mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a voodoo doll with a direct, physical line to my nervous system. It could do anything it wanted to me, from anywhere. And I was trapped in this box with it. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. I looked at the mirror. The man inside was unmarked. His face was pale, his eyes dark, but there was no bruise. There was no sign of the violence he had just inflicted. He lowered his fist. Then, with the same horrifying deliberation as before, he lifted his right arm. He didn't make a fist this time. He just pointed. His finger was aimed past my shoulder, toward the far wall of the bedroom, toward the white, cheap-looking doors of my built-in closet. It was a command. A silent, unarguable order. And I felt my body respond. A tremor ran through my right leg. It bent at the knee, my foot lifting from the floor. I didn't tell it to move. My mind was screaming, a frantic, silent "No, no, no." But my muscles weren't listening. They were obeying a different master. My right foot slid forward. Then the left. I was standing up. My body did not belong to me anymore. I was a puppet, and the strings were pulled from behind the glass. I turned. My legs, stiff and jerky like a marionette's, began to carry me toward the bedroom. Each step was a nightmare. My mind was a passenger, trapped inside a shell of flesh and bone that was walking towards something it knew, with primal certainty it should not see. I wanted to fight, to fall to the floor, to dig my fingernails into the wall. I couldn't. My arms hung limply at my sides. My legs moved with a steady, robotic rhythm. I passed the foot of the bed. The closet doors loomed in front of me, two flat panels of white paint. I stopped. My right hand began to rise. It trembled violently, a palsy of rebellion against the signal controlling it. It rose higher and higher until it was level with the small, brass-colored knob on the right-hand door. My fingers, cold and numb, closed around the metal. It felt cold. It felt final. "Don't," my mind pleaded. "Don't open it." My hand twisted the knob. I pulled. The door swung open with a soft click. It wasn't a closet full of my shirts and jackets. The space inside seemed to swallow the dim light from the main room. Hanging in the very center, suspended from a single hanger, was a dress. A white dress. The recognition was instant and absolute. It was the dress I saw in my nightmares, the one that sometimes flickered at the edge of my vision when I was tired or drunk. The simple, sleeveless cut. The delicate fabric. But it wasn't pristine. It was ruined. The bottom half was caked in thick, dark mud, as if it had been dragged through a swamp. And the chest. The chest was a Jackson Pollock of dried, blackened stains. They weren't just spots. They were great, ugly splashes, the color of rust and old pennies. Blood. So much blood. A sound escaped me. A low, guttural heave. My stomach tried to empty itself, but there was nothing in it. I dry retched, my body shuddering. The connection to the puppet master snapped. Control flooded back into my limbs. I slammed the closet door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the apartment. I stumbled back, my legs giving way. My back hit the wall and I slid down it, my body folding until I was crouched on the floor, my head in my hands. In the mirror, I could see the reflection. It wasn't me anymore. It was a monster wearing my face. Its mouth was stretched wide in a silent, ecstatic laugh. Its whole body shook with a mirth I could not hear, but could feel in the very air of the room. It was rejoicing in my discovery. It was celebrating my terror. A sharp, insistent buzzing sound cut through my shuddering breaths. My phone. It was on the sofa. The screen was lit up. The vibration was a physical, jarring presence in the charged atmosphere. My body moved without my thinking, a raw instinct to connect to the outside world, to any sign of life that wasn't this room. I scrambled over to the sofa and snatched it. A new message. From a number I did not recognize. My thumb trembled as I tapped the notification. The message was short. 6 words. Do you remember her perfume? As my eyes read the last word, it started. A scent. It was faint at first, barely there. A delicate, sweet fragrance. It wasn't a perfume I knew, it was floral. Distinct. It grew stronger, blooming in the stale air of the apartment, pushing aside the smell of my own sweat and fear. It was a beautiful smell. A clean smell. It smelled like night-blooming flowers after a rain. Jasmine. The sweet, cloying aroma filled my lungs. It was everywhere. It was coming from nowhere. It was a ghost in the air, a memory made real, and it was the most horrifying thing I had ever experienced. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the one I had run from for a year. The dress. The blood. The jasmine. Amelia's perfume. The scent was the key. It unlocked a door in the back of my head, a door I had nailed shut and bricked over. The sweet, heavy perfume of jasmine filled the room, an invisible gas displacing the air, making my lungs burn. It was a scent that didn't belong here, in this stale box of sweat and fear. It belonged to a summer night a year ago. It belonged to her. Amelia. My stomach seized. A violent knot of muscle. I fell to my hands and knees, dry heaving onto the floorboards. Nothing came up. The laughing man in the mirror watched the show, his body shaking with a glee that made the hair on my arms stand up. He was enjoying this. He had planned this. The dress. The text. The smell. It was a curated tour of my own personal hell. My phone. I had to get to my phone. I crawled, my hands scraping against the floor, the splinters in my palms, sending sharp signals of pain up my arms. The phone lay on the sofa cushions, a small rectangle of light in the gloom. It was a lifeline, a connection to a world where reflections stayed on their side of the glass. I snatched it, my thumb fumbling at the screen. My contact list was a blur. I stabbed at the first name I recognized. Liz. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Jake? What's wrong? It's 2 a.m. Her voice. It was real. It was outside this room. A wave of relief so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over me. Tears streamed down my face hot and fast. Liz. I managed, my voice a broken thing. Liz, you have to help me. Jake, slow down. What is it? What happened? Are you hurt? The mirror. I sobbed, the words tumbling out, nonsensical. It's the mirror. It's in the apartment. The dress. Her dress is in the closet, Liz. It's covered in blood. I was hyperventilating, sucking in air that was thick with jasmine. I can smell it. I can smell her perfume. There was a pause on the other end. A thick silence filled with alarm. Okay, Jake. Okay. Listen to me. Where are you? I'm home. In my apartment. It's choking me, Liz. It hit me. I can feel it. Who hit you, Jake? Is someone there with you? Her voice was strained now, trying to remain calm, but I could hear the wire-taut tension underneath. She thought I was drunk. Or worse. No, not a person. The thing in the mirror. My face. It's wearing my face. Okay, she said again, that placating tone one uses for a child or a madman. Okay, Jake. I want you to sit down. Can you do that for me? Just sit down on the floor. I'm coming over. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't hang up, okay? Just stay on the line with me. I couldn't answer. The connection felt wrong. Her voice felt a million miles away. The realest thing in the universe was the sheet of silvered glass across the room. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor. Liz's tiny, frantic voice still calling my name from the speaker. The sound was thin and meaningless. A strange stillness settled over me. The panic was gone, burned away, leaving behind a cold, hollow space. I pushed myself up, my joints creaking. I had to look. I didn't want to, but I had to. My gaze was drawn back to the mirror as if by a magnetic force. The reflection was no longer laughing. It stood perfectly still, its head slightly bowed. Its left hand was raised, pressed against its own chest. As I watched, it did something that made the air freeze in my lungs. It dug the fingers of its right hand into the fabric of its shirt, right over its heart. It pulled its fingers away, and they came back glistening with something dark and thick. My blood. Or its blood. There was no difference. It turned its hand and stared at the dark liquid on its fingertips for a long moment. Then, with an agonizing slowness, it reached out and pressed its index finger to the surface of the glass. The substance smeared, leaving a dark red streak. It began to write. It was writing backward, from right to left, the letters forming in reverse so that I could read them. Each stroke was deliberate, the finger dragging through the slick wetness. The sound was faint but clear, a soft, wet whisper against the glass. TSURTTONDI stared at the finished message, my mind struggling to process it. Don't trust. The reflection's bloody finger hovered for a second, then added one final word. I don't trust it. I stood, rooted to the spot. My breath was a soft mist in the cold air. Don't trust it. What was it? The mirror itself. A warning from some trapped part of me. Or was this just another layer of the game, a lie designed to twist my mind into new shapes of fear? My eyes darted from the bloody words on the glass to my own hands. They were clean, except for the drying blood around the splinters. A sudden, violent banging on the front door shattered the silence. Bang! 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 I flinched, a sharp cry catching in my throat. Jake! It's me! Open the door! Jake, are you okay? Liz. She was here. She was fast. My body moved before my mind could, stumbling toward the door, toward the sound of her voice. Rescue. It was right there, on the other side of the wood. My hand, trembling, reached for the deadbolt. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me stop. I turned my head. The man in the mirror was looking at me. The bloody words were still there, but his expression had changed completely. It was no longer calm or menacing. It was an expression of raw, abject terror. His eyes were wide, pleading. His hands were clasped together in front of his chest, a gesture of desperate prayer. He shook his head, a fast, frantic motion. No, Jake! Please, open the door. I'm worried about you. Her fists hammered against the wood again, each impact a jolt to my nervous system. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection's mouth opened. It formed words without sound, a silent, urgent message that I could read on its lips. Send. Her. Away. My hand froze an inch from the deadbolt. A cold dread, different from before, seeped into my veins. Why would it be scared of her? Danger. The reflection mouthed, its eyes boring into mine. She is danger. Jake, I'm calling the police if you don't open this door right now. Liz's voice was high-pitched, cracking with tears and panic. My mind was a whirlpool. Liz. My sister, who had always looked out for me, who sounded terrified for me, and the thing in the glass. The monster that had choked me, hit me, and shown me the horrors in my own closet. It was warning me. It was telling me that the real threat was outside the apartment, the one trying to get in. It made no sense. But the look on my own face in the mirror, it was a look of such genuine, soul-deep fear. It was the same fear I felt when its fingers were around my throat. It was telling me that whatever Liz was bringing with her was worse. Go away! The words scraped out of my raw throat, louder than I intended. The banging stopped. There was a moment of complete silence. I could hear my own heart, a frantic drumming against my ribs. Jake? Her voice was small now, uncertain, hurt. What did you say? I pressed my back against the door, as if I could hold it shut with my own body weight. I looked at the reflection. It was nodding now, a slow, urgent motion. Yes, do it. Send her away. Who was she with? Why had she gotten here so fast? The question swarmed in my head, planted there by the silent, terrified man in the glass. Don't trust it. Was Liz the it? Had she known about Amelia? Did she know more than she ever let on? Cone. A new wave of pleading came from the other side of the door. Please, Jake, just let me in. Let me see that you're okay. We can talk. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Her words sounded hollow. They sounded practiced. I squeezed my eyes shut. I saw the bloody dress. I smelled the jasmine. I saw the contemptuous smirk on my reflection's face as it watched me bleed. And I saw its current terror. A tug-of-war was happening inside my skull, tearing me in two. The sister I loved versus the monster that wore my face. Reality versus the impossible truth I was being shown on the glass. The reflection raised a trembling hand and pointed an inch from its own eye, then swiped the finger down its cheek. A tear. Then it pointed at me. She will make you cry. That decided it. In a world where nothing made sense, I chose the devil I could see. I'm fine, I screamed, my voice cracking. I was having a nightmare. You woke me up. Just go home, Liz. Jake, that's not true. You called me. You were. Go away, I roared, putting every ounce of conviction I could muster into the sound. Leave me alone. I don't need your help. Just fucking go. The silence that followed was absolute. I held my breath, listening. For a full minute, there was nothing. Then, I heard it. A soft, choked sound. A sob. It was muffled by the thick wood of the door, but it was unmistakable. It was the sound of my sister crying. My legs felt weak. A wave of guilt washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. What have I done? Hers. I heard the soft scuff of her shoes as she turned. Her footsteps receded down the hallway. I heard the distant, mournful ding of the elevator arriving, the slide of the doors opening and closing. And then she was gone. The apartment was still. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. I had done it. I had pushed away the only person left in the world who cared about me. I was alone. Truly alone. Just me and the thing in the glass. Slowly, as if moving underwater, I turned around. I faced the mirror. The image of terror was gone from my reflection's face. The bloody words were gone, too. The surface of the glass was clean and smooth. My reflection stood there, looking back at me. Its expression was calm, composed. It looked relieved. It raised its hand, not in a threat, but in a gesture. It nodded, a single, slow, deliberate dip of the chin. It was a nod of approval, a nod of thanks, a nod that said, "You did well." I stared, my mind numb. I felt nothing. Not fear, not relief, just a vast emptiness. My reflection held my gaze for a long moment. Then, its left eye closed in a slow, deliberate movement. It winked. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It wasn't a joke. It was the wink of a co-conspirator, a partner, a silent acknowledgement of a secret shared and a pact sealed. It said, "It's just us now. We're on the same side." A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The fear I had felt before was clean, simple. This was different. This was a filthy thing, a sense of connection that felt like a disease. I didn't want to break the mirror anymore. I didn't want to run. I just stood there, looking at my new, and only, friend. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of curiosity. I wanted to know what we were going to do next. I don't know how long I was on the floor. Time had become a fluid thing, pooling in the corners of the room. I might have slept. I might have just lost consciousness. My cheek was pressed to the hard wood, the grain imprinting a pattern on my skin. A dull ache throbbed in my skull, a low tide of pain left over from the earlier panic. The coppery taste of blood was still in my mouth. When I pushed myself up, my joints cracking in protest, the feeling was not one of fear. The terror had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, hollowed-out landscape. It was a new kind of awareness, a tired surrender. I was a passenger now. I was just here to watch the show. My gaze, heavy and slow, lifted to the mirror. It was waiting. My reflection sat on the floor, mirroring my exact position. It didn't mock me. It didn't smile. It just watched me with my own eyes, its expression unreadable. The wink had changed everything. It had been an invitation into a conspiracy. The hammering of my heart had subsided to a slow, heavy beat, a metronome counting down to the next event. We stayed like that for a long time, me on my floor and it on its, a pair of bookends holding up the crushing weight in the room. Then, it moved. My body remained fixed, a statue of cold flesh and bone on the floorboards. But the man in the glass, my other self, flowed upward with a liquid grace. He rose to his feet without a sound. He wasn't mimicking me anymore. The tether had been cut. He was his own man, in his own world, and I was his captive audience. He stood for a moment, brushing invisible dust from his pants, the same pants I was wearing. His movements were deliberate, full of a purpose I couldn't comprehend. He turned his head, not looking at me, but towards the front door of the apartment. My front door. He walked. The polished surface of the mirror contained him, but it felt like he was pacing the real space of my home. He stopped at the small ceramic bowl, one keep on the end table by the entrance. The bowl where one throw my keys. His hand, my hand, dipped into the invisible bowl. His fingers curled, miming the act of scooping something up. As his hand closed into a fist, a sound bloomed inside my head, faint but sharp. The metallic jingle of keys. It wasn't a real sound. The room was deathly quiet. It was a sound played directly into my brain, a memory made audible. He shook his fisted hand, and the phantom jingle happened again, louder this time. A shiver traced its way down my spine, cold and sharp. He knew my habits. He knew what was in that bowl. He knew the sound my keys made. He walked to the door. My door. His hand reached out and wrapped around an imaginary doorknob. He turned it. I heard the click of the latch, a crisp, mechanical sound that echoed in the space behind my eyes. He pulled the door open and stepped through the frame, disappearing for a second from the mirrored view as he exited the room. I was staring at an empty reflection of my own living room. It was the most disturbing thing I had seen yet. A space that should contain me, an uncanny copy of my world, was now empty. I was alone. And he was out there. A low rumble started, a vibration that seemed to come up through the floorboards. It grew into the familiar groan of a car engine turning over. My car engine. I knew its cough, its sputtering catch. The sound was so clear I could almost smell the exhaust. It filled my head, pushing out all other thought. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The theater was in my skull. The engine settled into a rough idle. Then, the sound of a radio crackled to life. A song. A tinny, forgettable pop song from last summer. One Amelia used to love. The song played, distorted and distant. A ghost broadcast from a year ago. I could feel the phantom thrum of the engine in my teeth, in my sternum. My hands, resting on my knees, twitched. My foot pressed against the floor, an involuntary spasm, as if pushing down on a gas pedal. I was no longer just watching. I was a part of it. My body was a puppet, my senses hijacked to experience this spectral journey. The radio song grew louder, angrier. The engine roared, the sound of a hard acceleration. In my mind's eye, I saw streetlights streaking past, blurring into lines of yellow-white. The phantom car swerved, and my own body lurched in concert. My stomach dropped. A turn taken too fast. The squeal of tires, high and thin, screamed in my ears. The reflection reappeared in the mirror. He was in the car now, sitting, facing forward. I could only see him from the side, his hands gripping an invisible steering wheel. His jaw was clenched, a cord of muscle bulging in his cheek. His knuckles were white. He wasn't just driving, he was fleeing, His face was a contorted mask of fury and something else. Something that looked like panic. He glanced at his side mirror, a quick, frantic jerk of the head. His eyes were wide. The phantom engine screamed as he slammed his foot down. The scenery in his world must have been a sickening blur. He was running from something. Or towards something. The pop song on the radio was just noise now, a screeching, chaotic backdrop to the violence of the drive. He tore at the invisible wheel, a sharp right turn. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud. It was a dense, dull impact. A wet, solid thump. It was the sound of a heavy bag of sand being dropped onto concrete, the sound of something soft, giving way to something hard. It cut through the engine noise, through the radio, through everything. The vibration of it shot through my entire frame, a sickening jolt that snapped my teeth together. The man in the mirror froze. His hands were locked on the wheel. His head was rigid, facing forward. But his eyes, my eyes, darted to the invisible rearview mirror mounted in the center of his windshield. They were wide. So wide, the fury was gone, replaced by a vast, stark shock. An animal stillness. He didn't get out. He didn't turn back. For one long, stretched-out second, he did nothing. The pop song continued its mindless chatter. Then, his face changed again. The shock hardened into something else. A grim, cold resolve. His jaw set. His gaze snapped forward. He stomped on the accelerator. The sound of the engine in my head became a deafening roar. The phantom car lunged forward, leaving the dull, wet sound behind in the darkness. He drove faster and faster, a desperate, headlong flight into the night. The sound of the engine eventually faded, leaving only the dying static of the radio, and then, nothing. The show was over. The apartment was quiet again. The only sound was my own breathing, coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My shirt was damp with sweat. My whole body trembled. The reflection walked back into frame. He came through the invisible door, closing it softly behind him. He walked to the center of the mirror's world and stopped, standing directly opposite me. He looked down at me, still crumpled on the floor. His face was a blank slate. No anger, no fear, no relief, just my own features, empty of all feeling. We remained like that, the witness and the actor. Then, slowly, it began. It wasn't sudden. It was a horrifying, gradual crawl. The lines of his face started to soften. The square jaw seemed to narrow, the brow bone to recede, the skin smoothed out, the faint lines of stress around my eyes fading away. My dark hair seemed to grow longer, fuller, falling in a way I had only ever seen on someone else. The lips grew fuller, the nose smaller. It was like watching a clay sculpture being remolded by unseen hands. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the transformation. It was my face, but it wasn't my face. It was becoming her face. Amelia's. The cheekbones I knew. The curve of the eyebrows I had touched 1,000 times. The small mole just above her lip. The metamorphosis was complete. Staring back at me from the surface of the mirror was not my reflection. It was the woman I had supposedly mourned. The woman whose bloody dress was in my closet. Her expression was not accusatory. It was not angry. It was just sad. A deep, profound sorrow that seemed to emanate from the glass. Her eyes, looking into mine, filled with moisture. A single, perfect tear welled up in the corner of her left eye. It trembled there for a moment, a tiny, glistening jewel of grief. And then, it broke free. It traced a slow, silent path down her cheek, on my face, in my mirror. She wasn't accusing me, she wasn't haunting me. She was just crying. Crying for me. Or for herself. I couldn't tell. And in that moment, I knew. That sound. That sickening, wet thump. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory. And the one who hit the gas, who fled into the night leaving her behind, wasn't a monster in a mirror. It was me. I crawled backward, my palms and the seat of my pants scraping against the floorboards. My throat worked, but no sound came out. The face in the mirror, Amelia's face, watched me. The tear tracked a path down a cheek that was and was not mine. It was a silent condemnation, a grief so pure, it was an acid. The knowledge landed in my gut, not like a punch, but like a block of ice. That wet, solid sound. The engine roar. The flight. Not a monster in the glass. Me. My back hit the door jamb of the living room. The impact sent a jolt up my spine. I scrambled through the doorway, crab-walking into the hall, my eyes still locked on the mirror. Her face, her sad, perfect face, did not change. It just watched me go. I turned and fled. The kitchen. It was my only refuge. No mirrors. Just stainless steel, linoleum, and the hum of the old refrigerator. I leaned against the counter, my knuckles white where I gripped the edge. My breath came in harsh, ragged bursts. I looked down at my hands. They didn't look like my hands. The skin was pale, almost gray under the single fluorescent light overhead. The fine hairs on my arms seemed darker, starker. The veins beneath the skin were a faint, bruised blue, like rivers on a dead map. A rot. I felt it. A decay that started somewhere deep inside me, in a place without a name, and was now working its way to the surface. I was a house with a compromised foundation. The walls were about to come down. I needed to do something. Something normal. An anchor. Coffee. That was normal. People made coffee. I reached for the metal pot, my movements stiff and robotic. I filled it with water from the tap, the sound of it splashing into the container too loud in the quiet room. I scooped grounds into the filter. My hands shook, spilling dark flakes onto the white countertop. They looked like grave dirt. I wiped at them, smearing them into a brown streak. The machine gurgled to life, a low, comforting sound from another lifetime. A lifetime before I knew. My gaze drifted across the kitchen. The polished chrome of the toaster. The glass on the microwave door. The dark, reflective screen of the small television on the counter. Every surface was a potential betrayal. I turned my back to them, facing the blank wall. I focused on the sound of the coffee dripping, one drop at a time. A slow, steady rhythm. Like a clock. Or a heart. The coffee was ready. The smell, rich and dark, filled the small space. It was a good smell. A real smell. I reached for a mug, my favorite one. A heavy ceramic thing Amelia had bought me. Her name flashed in my mind and I almost dropped it. I set it on the counter with a loud clack. I poured the hot, black liquid. Steam rose, clouding the air. I saw the silver sheen of the coffee pot out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't help it. My head turned. For a fraction of a second I saw him. My reflection, warped by the curve of the metal. But it wasn't right. On the reflection's cheek, my cheek, there was a spot, a patch of skin, the size of a quarter. It wasn't a shadow. It was darker, wetter. The skin looked soft, puckered, like fruit left in the sun. A wet, green-black bloom of decay at its center. An ulcer. A wound seeping corruption. A strangled noise tore from my throat. The mug slipped from my grasp. It didn't shatter. The heavy ceramic hit the linoleum with a dull, heavy thud. Hot coffee splashed across the floor, across my shoes, scalding my ankle through my sock. The pain was sharp and immediate. A welcome distraction. I stumbled back, gasping, and frantically pawed at my own cheek. My fingers met smooth, unbroken skin. Warm, a little sweaty, but whole. Absolutely whole. I scrubbed at it, desperate, as if I could wipe away the image I had seen. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. But the image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The rot. I left the mess on the floor. I couldn't stay in the kitchen anymore. The toaster was a warped funhouse mirror. The microwave was a black, dead eye. I was a man trapped in a house of watchers, and all of them wore my face. There was only one place left to go. The source. I had to see it again. The need was a sickness, a compulsion that overrode the terror. I had to know if it was still her, or if it had become him again, or if it had become something else. I walked out of the kitchen. My steps were slow, deliberate. Each footstep on the wood floor was an announcement. I'm coming. I'm here. I stopped in the doorway to the living room. It was waiting for me. The mirror. It wasn't Amelia's face anymore. It was mine. My reflection stood in the center of the mirrored room, perfectly still, a perfect copy. It stood there, watching me approach, its expression as empty as mine. We stared at each other across the space. The actor and the witness. The man who was and the man who did. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken truth. Then it started. It wasn't fast. It wasn't a sudden shift. It was a slow biological horror, a time lapse of decay. I watched, unable to move, as the skin on my reflection's face began to change. It lost its color, fading to a waxy, translucent gray. A small, dark spot appeared on its chin, like the one I'd seen on the coffee pot, and began to spread, a creeping stain of blackness. The eye on the left, my left, began to cloud over. The sclera yellowed, spiderwebbed with tiny red veins, and the pupil became a milky, cataract-like orb. It was looking at me, but it wasn't seeing. I could smell it. At first, it was faint, a sweet, cloying odor, like old flowers in stagnant water. It grew stronger, heavier, seeping out of the living room. The smell of a butcher shop at the end of a long day. The smell of meat that had turned. It was impossible. It was a smell coming from a two-dimensional image. But it filled my nostrils, coated the back of my throat. I gagged, a dry heave that brought up nothing but acid. My reflection did not gag. It didn't react at all. It just continued to decompose. One of its front teeth, my front tooth, darkened from white to a dirty, sick yellow. A thin, black line appeared at the gum line. As I watched, mesmerized in horror, the tooth loosened. It tilted forward, unnaturally, and then fell, disappearing from the mouth without a sound, leaving a black, gaping hole. A thin trickle of dark, viscous fluid, too thick for blood, oozed from the socket and traced a path down its chin. It was me. It was what was happening inside of me. The moral rot. The spiritual gangrene. The mirror wasn't showing me a monster. It was showing me my soul. And my soul was a corpse. I couldn't take it. I screamed then. A raw, animal sound of pure revulsion. I turned and ran to the hall closet, fumbling inside, my hands searching for anything. A roll of duct tape. A stack of old newspapers. I found them. My weapon against the truth. I started with the big mirror. I didn't look at it. I kept my head turned away, my eyes focused on the wall as I tore off long strips of newspaper and slapped them against the glass. I sealed the edges with tape, the ripping sound of the adhesive, a savage counterpoint to my ragged breathing. I worked with a frantic energy, covering every inch of the silvered surface until it was an opaque rectangle of old headlines and gray pulp. One prison cell sealed. Then, the rest of the house. The bathroom mirror was next, taped, covered. The small decorative mirror in the hallway, covered. The glass of the picture frames on the wall. I turned them all to face the plaster. The television screen in the living room, newspaper and tape. The microwave door, covered. The toaster. I unplugged it and shoved it into a deep cabinet. I went through the silverware drawer, pulling out the spoons, their concave bowls like little distorted eyes. I threw them into a cardboard box and kicked it into the pantry. When I was done, the apartment was dark, muted. I had blinded my home. There was nowhere left for him to look at me. I collapsed in the corner of the living room farthest from the now papered-over mirror. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around my head. I made myself small. I tried not to exist. The smell of rot was still in the air, but it was fainter now. Or maybe I was just getting used to it. The silence in the apartment was a living thing. It pressed in on my eardrums. I closed my eyes. There was nothing to see, nothing to hear, just the frantic hammering of my own heart. Drip. The sound was so small, I thought I'd imagined it. A single, distinct drop. Drip. There it was again. I held my breath, listening. My heart froze. This was a new sound. It wasn't the rhythmic drip of the coffee maker. This was slower. Heavier. Drip. 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 I slowly, so slowly, lifted my head. My eyes scanned the shadows of the room. The sound was coming from near the far wall. From the area where the big mirror was. I squinted, trying to make out the source in the gloom. My gaze traveled up the wall, up the expanse of taped newspaper, to the ceiling. Directly above the center of the covered mirror, a dark spot was forming on the white ceiling paint. It was small at first, but it was growing, spreading like a watercolor blot. As I watched, a bead of liquid formed at its center. It swelled, hung there for a long second, glistening in the faint light from the window, and then it fell. It hit the top of the papered mirror with a soft pat. It was a black liquid, thick, like oil. Drip. Another drop formed. It fell. Drip. Another. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling. I took a step forward, then another, drawn by a horrifying curiosity. I stood a few feet away, watching the black substance seep from my ceiling. What was it? Leaking pipe? Tar from the roof? No. It was coming from inside. It was leaking from the rot. I held out my hand, palm up. A stupid, instinctual gesture. I don't know why I did it, I just did. A drop of the black liquid detached from the ceiling. It fell through the air in a perfect, dark teardrop. It landed squarely on the back of my hand. The cold was instantaneous and absolute. It wasn't the cold of ice or winter. It was a dead cold, a cellar cold, a cold that felt like it was actively sucking the heat from my body. It didn't feel wet, it felt heavy. I stared at the black bead on my skin. A smell rose from it, sharp and earthy. The smell of turned soil. The smell of an open grave. My eyes snapped back up to the covered mirror. The newspaper was no longer gray and dry. It was saturated. Dark, wet patches spread across its surface, originating from the center and bleeding outwards. The black fluid was weeping through the paper, dripping down its front in thick, slow rivulets. It wasn't leaking from the ceiling onto the mirror. It was leaking from inside the mirror, out into my world. I watched the drop of black liquid on the back of my hand. It didn't spread. It didn't soak in. It just sat there, a perfect, dark dome, holding its shape. The cold it gave off was not a surface sensation. It sank into my flesh, a deep, penetrating chill that felt like it was touching the bone. My skin tightened around it. A smell rose from the bead, sharp and chemical, layered over the deeper scent of damp earth. It was the smell of embalming fluid and freshly turned grave soil. My hand started to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled my arm in its socket. I wanted to scream, to fling my hand and send the drop flying, but I was frozen. My gaze was locked on that single point of corruption. It was a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished reading. The sentence of my life. With a choked gasp, I lurched toward the kitchen sink, my feet shuffling on the floor. I thrust my hand under the faucet and twisted the knob. Water blasted out, splashing over my hand, onto the counter, down my shirt. I scrubbed at the spot with my other hand, my nails digging into my skin. The black substance didn't wash away. It smeared. It became a greasy, dark stain, like engine oil, clinging to my pores. The cold remained, a permanent patch on my body. I scrubbed harder, frantically, until the skin was raw and red, but the stain and the cold would not leave. I stumbled back from the sink, clutching my hand to my chest. It felt like a foreign object, a dead thing grafted onto my arm. I looked around the apartment I had so carefully blinded. The newspaper over the mirrors and windows turned the midday light into a dim, gray haze. The air was thick with the stink of rot and the new, sharper chemical smell. The place was a tomb. My tomb. I had sealed myself inside with the corpse. A thought, clean and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the panic. I could end it. I could just stop. There was a bottle of sleeping pills in the bathroom cabinet. Left over from a back injury 2 years ago. I could swallow them all. Wash them down with the cheap whiskey under the sink. Then there would be nothing. No more reflections. No more smells. No more memories trying to crawl their way out of the pit I dug for them. Just silence. The thought was a comfort. A release. It was the only clean thing left in my world. I took a step toward the bathroom. Then another. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. My body felt heavy, my movements slow, as if wading through deep water. The stain on my hand felt like it was pulling me down. I reached the bathroom door. My hand was on the knob. The sound tore through the quiet. It was my phone. The ringtone, a stupid, generic chiming I'd never bothered to change, was a shriek in the suffocating gloom. It was on the small table by the sofa, a violent, electronic pulse in the dead air. I flinched back from the bathroom door as if struck. Who would be calling me? I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. It rang again, and again. A relentless, demanding summons. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Let it go to voicemail. Let it die. But a stronger, more desperate part needed it. It was a voice. Any voice. A connection to a world that wasn't this dark, stinking room. A lifeline. I stumbled into the living room, my eyes finding the small, dark rectangle of the phone on the table. Its screen was lit up. Unknown number. My hand, the clean one, trembled as I reached for it. I swiped the screen. I put the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything, I just listened. Silence. Then a click. The faint hiss of an open line on an old recording. A woman's voice, tinny and distant. 911, what is your emergency? A man's voice answered, breathless and agitated. I just saw Jesus, a car. It just hit a girl, in the crosswalk on Elm Street, just now. My blood went cold. Elm Street. The operator's voice, calm, professional. Sir, are you with the victim now? No, I'm on my balcony. I saw the whole thing. He didn't even slow down. He hit her, and he kept going. A dark sedan. He's gone. He just drove off. The words hung in the air between my ear and the phone. I could see it. Not as a memory, but as if I was there again, behind the wheel. The sudden shape in the headlights. The wet, solid sound. The jolt. The scream that was mine. The flight. The recording ended with a sharp click. The line went dead. I stood in the middle of my living room. The phone clenched in my fist. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't my memory. It was someone else's. A witness. A witness had called it in. I never knew. I just drove. I drove and drove until the gas tank was empty, and I threw up on the side of a highway I didn't recognize. Before I could lower my arm, the phone rang again. The same shrill chime. The same unknown number flashing on the screen. My thumb moved on its own. It answered the call without my permission. I pressed the phone to my ear, a slave to the sound. Another click. More static. But this time, the voice was mine. Oh God! Oh no, 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 no! It was my voice. But not my voice. It was a version of me I had buried. A high, thin thing, cracking with panic. A sound of pure, animal terror. What did I do? What did I do? Oh my God, what did I do? The sound of ragged, wet sobbing filled the line. My sobbing. I was listening to myself break apart in real time. A ghost whispering my sin into my own ear. I pulled the phone away, my arm falling limp to my side, but the recorded sound of my own unraveling seemed to follow me, echoing in the gray room. My gaze fell on the large television against the wall. Its screen was a black, polished void. A dark mirror, and in it, I saw myself. A hunched, pathetic shape in the gloom. But the shape was wrong. The me in the screen wasn't just standing there. Its arm was raised. It was holding a sleek, black object to its ear. An invisible phone. It was listening. Its head cocked slightly. A perfect mimicry of a man on a call. As my own voice from the recording whimpered, I can't. I have to go. The reflection's shoulders shook with silent sobs. It was acting out the phone call. It was showing me the man I was that night. The recording cut off. The phone in my hand went silent. It rang a third time. A noise tore from my throat, a sound of rage and despair. I wasn't going to be a puppet. I wasn't going to listen. I jammed the phone to my face, my lips pressed against the plastic. WHO! Are you? I screamed, my voice raw. What do you want from me? There was no click this time. No static. Just a pause. Then a voice answered. It was a man's voice. Calm. Measured. Devoid of any emotion. Is this Jake Miller? The sound of my own name was a physical blow. This is Sergeant Detectives from the police department. The voice continued, smooth and unhurried. We have a few questions we'd like to ask you regarding an unresolved hit-and-run case from 5 years ago. We're outside your apartment now. At that exact moment, a fist hit my front door. Boom. 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 The sound was immense. Solid. It shook the whole apartment. It vibrated up through the floor, into the bones of my feet. Police! A voice shouted from the other side of the door, the same impossibly calm voice from the phone. Open up! The blood in my veins turned to ice. My body went rigid. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. They had found me. After all this time, they knew. But how? How could they possibly know? My eyes darted from the door, which now seemed thin as paper, to the dark screen of the television. To my reflection. It wasn't cowering anymore. It wasn't sobbing. It stood straight and tall in the black glass. It was looking right at me. And it was smiling. It was a small smile, a twitch at the corner of its lips, a tight, knowing, satisfied expression. As I watched, frozen in a horror beyond anything I had ever known, the reflection slowly raised its hand. Not the hand holding the invisible phone. The other one. It brought a single finger up to its smiling lips, pressing it there gently. Shh! It had called them. The thing in the mirror. The man who did the deed. The part of me I had tried to kill. It had turned me in. Boom, boom, boom. Mr. Miller, open the door now. The reflection watched me, its finger still pressed to its lips, its smile widening into a triumphant grin. It had won. The wood of the door shuddered. Boom. A deep, bone-jarring impact that was more felt than heard. The frame groaned, showering fine dust onto the floor. My heart was a stone in my chest. I couldn't move. My legs were locked, my muscles fused with ice. Across the room, the man in the television screen held his triumphant smile, finger pressed to his lips. A co-conspirator in my own damnation. He had made the call. He had brought them here. He was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. Mr. Miller, we have a warrant. Open this door. The voice was the same one from the phone. Calm. Unyielding. A voice that did not negotiate. Boom. Another impact, harder this time. A hairline crack shot up the wall next to the door jamb. They weren't waiting. They were coming through. My survival instinct, a buried and primitive thing, finally kicked in. It was a jolt of pure electricity. My legs unlocked. I stumbled backwards, my bare feet slipping on the polished wood. My gaze never left the door, now the epicenter of my collapsing world. I passed the phone lying on the floor, its small screen dark. I backed out of the living room, my shoulder bumping the archway into the hall. The tomb I had built was being breached. I retreated down the short, dark hallway, my back scraping against the wall. The only other place to go was the bedroom. My sanctuary. The room where I had hung the largest mirror. The source. The knocking stopped. A new sound reached me. A splintering, tearing noise, followed by the metallic ratchet of a tool. A crowbar. The sound was methodical. Efficient. They were no longer asking. I reached the bedroom doorway and turned. The room was even darker than the rest of the apartment, the single window covered with a thick blanket duct taped to the frame. The air was heavy with the smell of my own sweat and the faint, sweet odor of rot. And there it was. Against the far wall. The antique mirror. It stood nearly as tall as me, its ornate wooden frame like grasping skeletal fingers. From the joints of the wood, the same black liquid I'd seen on my hand oozed slowly, tracing thick, oily paths down the frame and onto the floor, where it formed a small dark puddle. But the image within the glass was no longer the jeering, decomposing thing it had been. It was not the smiling monster from the television screen. It was just me, or a version of me. He stood there, in the center of the reflection, perfectly still. His clothes weren't disheveled. His face wasn't twisted in terror. He was calm. His eyes, clear and steady, met mine. There was a placid coldness in his gaze, an unnerving stillness. As I watched, paralyzed, he slowly raised his right hand, not in a wave, but with a single, crooked finger. He wasn't threatening me. He was beckoning me. Come here. The sound of the front door's lock giving way with a violent snap was distant, almost unimportant. The world had shrunk to this dim room, to the space between me and the man in the glass. He was the only thing that mattered. My feet obeyed the silent command. I took a step into the room, then another. The floorboards were cold. I stopped a few feet from the mirror, close enough to see the minute details of his face. It was my face, but the guilt, the fear, the frantic energy that had been my fuel for 5 years, it was all gone from him, emptied out, replaced by a quiet confidence. Police! Don't move! A shout from the living room. The sound of heavy boots on the hardwood. The reflection didn't flinch. His eyes never left mine. He was putting on a show. A final one. He turned away from me, his movements fluid and deliberate within the glass. He walked to the reflection of the closet. He opened the invisible door. He reached inside, his hands moving with purpose, and pulled out an object. He held it up. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see it, but I knew its shape. A simple white summer dress. I could feel the ghost of its light fabric in my own hands. The reflection held the phantom dress for a moment, as if admiring it. Then, he knelt. The sounds from the living room grew louder. Men were spreading out, clearing the space. "Check the back rooms," one of them yelled. He ignored them. His counterpart in the mirror world paid them no mind. He placed the invisible dress carefully on the floor beside him. His fingers found the edge of a floorboard. With a steady, practiced motion, he pried it up. It came loose without a sound. He lifted the board, revealing a dark cavity beneath the floor. He was not punishing me. He was not taunting me. He was showing me. He was instructing me. My mind reeled. This wasn't a haunting. This was a lesson, a demonstration. The final piece of the puzzle I had torn apart and scattered in my own head. The reflection folded the invisible dress with a neat precision I did not possess. He laid it gently in the dark space, then replaced the floorboard, pressing it down until it was flush with the others. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants, a gesture of a job completed. He turned to face me again, his expression unchanged. It was a look of finality. A look that said, "Now you know. Now you remember everything. In here, I got him." A shape filled the bedroom doorway. A man in a tactical vest, his face hard, a pistol held low and ready in his hands. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. The black ooze on the floor, the newspaper on the windows. Me, standing like a statue in the middle of the room, staring at a mirror. And in that instant, something broke. It wasn't the fear of the police. It wasn't the guilt of the crime. It was the calm, knowing face in the mirror. The face of my partner. The face of the part of me that had done it, remembered it, and was now taking a bow. The acceptance of it was a poison my conscious mind could not swallow. The sanity I had clung to by a thread for 5 years finally snapped. A noise tore from my throat. It was not human. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure negation. My eyes darted to the side, landing on the heavy oak writing chair sitting by the wall. The world went red at the edges. Time slowed to a crawl. The officer in the doorway was shouting something, moving toward me. I didn't hear him. I didn't see him. There was only the chair and the mirror. My body moved with a strength that was not my own. I lunged, my hands closing around the back of the chair. It felt weightless. I lifted it over my head, my muscles screaming in protest and exhilaration. For one clear second, I saw his face in the glass. The calm expression was gone, replaced by a flicker of what looked like surprise. Then, I threw it. I put every ounce of my being into the act. All the running, all the lying, all the fear, all the years. The chair flew across the small room, end over end, a dark projectile aimed at the heart of the truth. The impact was absolute. It was not the sound of glass breaking. It was an explosion. A deafening roar of annihilation that filled the room, the apartment, my head. The mirror did not crack. It vaporized. A glittering shockwave of 1,000 silver shards blasted outwards, peppering the walls, the floor, my skin. For a moment the air was thick with flying glass. A deadly, beautiful storm. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence. The screaming in my head had stopped. The oozing had stopped. The man in the glass was gone. Obliterated. I stood there, panting, my arms limp at my sides, amidst the wreckage. The chair lay splintered on the floor, surrounded by a carpet of glittering fragments. The silence was broken by the sound of a boot crunching on glass. The officer was standing over me, his gun still trained on my chest. Another officer appeared in the doorway behind him. They saw what I saw. Just a man. A broken chair. A shattered mirror. The phenomenon was over. The game was done. "On the floor," the first officer said, his voice level but tight. "Now." My strength was gone. I collapsed to my knees, my hands landing in the debris. The sharp edges of glass bit into my palms, but I didn't feel it. I was finished. The second officer, a sergeant by his stripes, stepped carefully into the room. He held a high-powered flashlight, its beam a clean white cone in the gloom. He swept it around the room, illuminating the squalor, the filthy bed, the taped-up window. His light passed over my face, blinding me for a second, then moved on. The beam traveled across the back wall where the mirror had been. It caught the dull gleam of the thousands of shards embedded in the plaster and wood. The light continued its slow sweep downwards. And then it stopped. It froze on the floor, right where the mirror's base had stood. The explosive impact of the chair had done more than just shatter the glass. On the floor, a single dark-stained floorboard was no longer flush with the others. Its corner was lifted by maybe half an inch, a dark line breaking the pattern of the floor. The sergeant took a slow step forward, the crunch of glass under his boots the only sound. He knelt down, his eyes fixed on the displaced board. He holstered his flashlight but pulled a small multi-tool from his belt. He flicked out a flat metal pry bar. With a quiet grunt of effort, he slipped the tip into the gap and leveraged it upwards. The board came up with a soft groan of old nails pulling free from wood. He set it aside. He picked up his flashlight again and aimed the beam into the dark rectangular hole he had just revealed. The cone of light found it immediately. Lying in the shallow, dusty space between the floorboards and the subfloor was a clear plastic object. A vacuum-sealed bag. It was flat and tidy. Inside, against a backdrop of white fabric, a dark, sprawling stain branched out like a dead tree. The color of rust. The color of something that had once been wet and red and had long since dried. The room was the color of old bone. The table was cold steel, bolted to the floor. The cuffs were heavy on my wrists. My hands lay on the tabletop, palms up. The small, deep cuts from the glass were stark red lines against my skin. I was telling them the story. The whole thing, about the antique shop, the way the glass seemed to ripple, the black liquid that seeped from the frame. I told them about the reflection that wasn't me, the one that grinned when I felt fear, the one that grew more decayed each day. I explained how it began whispering, how it started to move things. Across the table, two people listened, a man and a woman. Detectives. The man, Thorne, had a face like worn leather and eyes that gave nothing away. He just sat, his large hands folded, his posture a solid block of stillness. The woman, Evans, seemed younger. She had a pen and a notepad, but she wasn't writing much. She watched me with an expression that was almost gentle, the kind a doctor gives a patient describing an impossible symptom. My voice was a monotone. The energy that had fueled my panic for days, for years, was gone. I was scraped clean. It wanted out, I said, my voice raspy from disuse. The thing in the mirror. It wanted to take my place. It orchestrated everything. It made the call to you. It wanted an audience for the end. Thorne and Evans exchanged a look. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was a look of confirmation. They believed what they had already decided to believe before I even opened my mouth, that the man in front of them was broken. Detective Evans leaned forward slightly, pushing a styrofoam cup of water across the table toward me. Her movement was slow, deliberate. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice soft. "Arthur. Your sister Lily, she was very worried about you. She called us. She said you hadn't left the apartment in days. Said you'd kicked her out, told her to stay away, that the house wasn't safe. That's why we came. Lily's call." The name hung in the air. Lily. My sister. I remembered her face at the door, creased with concern. I remembered telling her to go, my voice harsh. The thing in the mirror had made me do it. It wanted me alone. It needed isolation to do its work. "She doesn't understand," I said, shaking my head. The movement felt sluggish. I was trying to protect her. From it. "From the mirror," Thorne said. It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, a statement of fact he was reciting back to me. "Yes." He made a small noise, not quite a sigh. He reached down beside his chair and lifted a thin manila folder onto the table. It made a soft, final sound as it landed on the steel. He didn't open it right away. He just let it sit there, a silent counter-argument to my entire reality. "We pulled the security footage from the building across the street," he said. He flipped the cover open. "Just for the last week. Standard procedure." He slid the first photograph across the table. It was a grainy black and white image. A man, me, was walking out of the front entrance of my apartment building. The timestamp in the corner read 2 nights ago. Midnight. "I didn't leave," I stated. The words felt like pebbles in my mouth. "I haven't left in a week. It wouldn't let me." Thorne ignored me. He slid a second photo over. This one was a closer shot of my apartment door. A hand, my hand, was holding a small piece of metal, something thin and sharp, and jamming it into the keyhole of my own deadbolt. The timestamp was from the same night, about 30 minutes later. I stared at the photo. My mind tried to make sense of it to fit it into the narrative of the haunting. It wouldn't fit. The pieces were wrong. "You reported a possible break-in attempt to the building manager 2 days ago," Evans said, her voice still quiet. "Said you thought someone had tampered with your lock. This was you, Arthur." A cold fluid seemed to creep up my spine. This was a trick. They were twisting things. The reflection. It could have left the mirror. It could have looked like me. It could have... He slid a third photo across the table. This was the one that stopped my breath. It showed me, my back to the camera, struggling to carry a large, tall object covered in a dusty white sheet through the front door of the building. The shape was unmistakable. The towering height. The ornate, curved top. It was the mirror. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, one day after Lily said I had kicked her out. "This is you, Mr. Miller," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble, "bringing the mirror home from a pawn shop on the other side of town, after you told your sister to leave, after you locked yourself in. The timeline you've given us, it doesn't add up. The haunting didn't start a month ago. It started 3 days ago. It started when you brought this into your home." My world tilted. The story, the carefully constructed sequence of events that had governed my life, began to fracture. The memories were a slick, writhing mass in my head. I remembered the dread. I remembered the whispers. But the timeline was broken. "No," I whispered. "No, it was there. It was always there." Thorne leaned back, a signal that he was done. It was Evan's turn again. She looked at me, and for the first time, the gentle expression was gone. It was replaced by a clinical pity. "Arthur, the paramedics who treated your hands found something in your pocket. A small digital audio recorder." I didn't remember a recorder. "And we placed a high-gain listening device outside your apartment door after Lily's call," Thorne added. "We were concerned for your welfare. We have a recording of the last hour, before we made entry." He reached over and pressed a button on a small, black device on the table. A hiss of static filled the sterile room. Then, a sound. Boom. It was the deep, jarring impact on my front door. The sound that had made my heart stop. I flinched in my chair. Boom. Another one. The sound was identical to my memory. Heavy. Solid. Malevolent. Then, a voice. "Mr. Miller, we have a warrant. Open this door." The voice was calm, unyielding. But hearing it now, in this clean, well-lit room, something was wrong. There was a strange flatness to it. A subtle digital artifact in the tone. The recording continued, the splintering, tearing noise of the crowbar. My own frantic movements in the background, the scrape of my feet on the floor. "Police! Don't move!" A shout from the living room on the tape, and then another voice. My voice. A raw, guttural noise of negation. The sound I had made right before I grabbed the chair. Then, the crash. The explosive, annihilating sound of the mirror vaporizing. Thorne stopped the recording. The silence that fell was heavier than any sound had been. "There's only one person making noise in that apartment, Arthur," Evans said, her voice barely a whisper. "You." I stared at her. The knocking. The voice. "We have technicians who analyze this sort of thing," Thorne said, his tone bored, as if explaining gravity. "The knocking was you, hitting the inside of your door with a rubber mallet we found in your kitchen. The voice on the outside? A simple voice-altering app on your phone. The call from the police earlier? Same thing. You called yourself. You played the part of the dispatcher. You played the part of the officer at the door. You played the part of the victim. It was all you." The bone-colored walls of the room seemed to press in. The air grew thick, heavy. It wasn't possible. The terror was real. The fear was real. The face in the glass. The rotting flesh. The grinning mouth. The black ooze. "The mirror," I choked out. "The reflection." "The mirror was just a mirror, Arthur," Thorne said. "Old glass. Maybe it had some flaws, some distortions. Your mind did the rest. You built a stage, and you played all the parts." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The only question is why?" He tapped the file folder. "Why the elaborate show? What are you trying so hard to forget?" He didn't need to say it. He didn't need to open the file again and show me what I knew was inside. A crime scene photo. A picture of a plastic bag. A picture of a white summer dress with a dark, sprawling stain. The object I had watched my reflection hide under the floorboards. The object the real police had found. The object my other self, my true self, had wanted them to find. It was not a haunting, it was a confession. A theatrical, insane confession, designed by one part of my mind to force the other part to see the truth. The reflection wasn't a demon from outside. It was the demon from inside. The part of me that did it. The part that remembered everything. The part that had been locked away for 5 years until it found a way to claw itself out, using an old piece of glass as its stage. It hadn't been punishing me. It had been teaching me, reminding me, guiding the police step by step to the evidence I had hidden so long ago. It needed to be caught. It wanted the play to be over. My gaze drifted from their faces to the wall behind them. It was a large pane of dark glass. A one-way mirror. I could see myself in it. My disheveled hair. My pale, drawn face. My scraped hands cuffed on the table. It was a perfect, normal reflection. There was no rot. There was no jeering grin. There was no monster. There was just me. And in that moment, seeing the simple, unadorned truth of my own face was 1,000 times more horrifying than any specter I had ever imagined. The absence of the monster was the final confirmation that the monster was me. I watched myself in the glass. I watched as the mouth on my reflection, the one in that other world behind the pane, began to change. It was slow. Subtle. The corners of its lips turned up, not into a snarl, not into a grimace. It was a simple, quiet smile. A smile of satisfaction, of a job well done, of victory. The part of me that had been running the show had won. It was in control now. A sound built in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes. I opened my mouth to scream, to let out all the black final knowledge that was flooding me. But nothing came out. The scream was silent. It had no sound to escape into. It just echoed inside the new, permanent prison of my own skull.